Chengli and the Silk Road Caravan, Chapter 3. 3 weeks already, Chengli muttered. 3 weeks on the road. Sore feet, sore arms, all just as Master Fong said. Chengli shuffled along beside the camels, trudging north toward the great Huanghe, the yellow river just beyond the city of Lanzhou. Hour after hour, it was all the same. They passed small villages surrounded by patchworks of vegetable gardens and tiny paddies where barefoot farmers bent low planting rice seedlings. In the larger fields, sometimes a farmer could be seen walking behind his ox as they turned over the soil, preparing to plant some new crop. The caravan did not stop at these villages, but moved forward at the slow speed of plodding camels. Cheng-Li's feet hurt, and he thought back wistfully to the comfort of the creaky, rickety cart he had shared with little Limp. Yet he dared not complain, or Master Fong would just dump him along the side of the road. Indeed, the work was harder than he'd imagined, taking the load off the camels at night, loading them up again every morning, tightening ropes, and, the worst part, the walking. He hadn't thought about the endless walking. And now this. Rain, rain, and more rain, he complained to himself as he sloshed along the muddy road beside El Khalid, his lead camel. He pulled down the wide-brimmed straw hat tighter on his head, tipping it forward to keep the rain out of his eyes. His water-soaked clothes stuck to his body, making it even harder to walk. The rain fell steadily, yellow with grit and heavy with dust blown from the northern deserts. Cheng-Li pulled his hat down farther. His legs ached from trudging through the mud, his arms ached from pulling on the rope to keep the camels moving, and his hands burned from constantly tightening the rain-slackened ropes to keep the heavy loads in place. He moved back along the line of camels assigned to his care, checking each load until he came to Fourth Brother, who was checking on his own assigned animals, the donkeys. "I hate these donkeys," Fourth Brother growled. "Master Fong promised me I could be a guard, but now he has shoved me back with the animals. That's where you're needed," he said. "I'll show him I can do more than just watch over a bunch of lazy donkeys." A shrill feminine voice sliced through Fourth Brother's mumbling. "This road is too bumpy. Amma, bring me another pillow. I am cold and wet, and this cart leaks. It is a royal cart. It should not leak. Do something." "That's the other problem," Fourth Brother added, cocking his head toward the cart behind them. "If I worked as a guard, I could get away from that annoying voice." Cheng-Li turned to stare at the covered cart painted with the imperial red and gold that bumped and rumbled behind them. "Who would want to marry a princess with a voice like that?" he muttered, agreeing with Fourth Brother. "All she does is whine." "I think Master put us here just because we're young and don't dare argue," Fourth Brother grumbled. "The older men refuse to work near that voice." Cheng-Li looked back again at the royal cart and its driver, who sat huddled under a small red and gold umbrella. Next to the cart rode the royal soldiers, each sitting straight and tall and trying to look important as the wind whipped the rain into their faces and the water ran all the little rivers down the length of their straw raincoats. Cheng-Li faced into the wind, thankful that this wind was not his demon. This wind tormented everyone. "Those men must be deaf, listening to her all the time," Fourth Brother added. "I wonder what she looks like. With a voice like that, she must be really ugly. Have you seen her?" "I don't want to see her, ever!" Cheng-Li yanked at a frayed rope and yelped as a red line of blood oozed from a crack in his rough, raw hand. He wiped the cut on his sleeve. "She rides along, safe inside her cart, doing nothing except giving orders to her amma and her maidservant. Keep me as far away from her as possible." "The cart behind hers carries her cook and all their equipment, and I've seen that a boy and girl work there, also," Fourth Brother said. "That cart at the very back is full of gifts for King Gul'dan. The horse riders never let anyone get near it, but they say it holds the best of the Empire's wine and grain, precious gems, silk, and brocades, even books." He looked down the line of soldiers, 10 on each side of the carts, barring all access to the princess and her possessions. "Amma!" the voice from the cart lashed out again. "I am sick of this rain. Make it stop!" The elderly servant's voice rose in frustration. "Princess Mei Ling, we are all cold and wet. I cannot control the heavens." "Then do something to make me more comfortable," the voice demanded. Cheng-Li glanced again at the horse riders, just as one of them looked down at him and winked. Cheng-Li jerked his head in surprise. "What?" he thought. "Are they sick of listening to her too? They're worse off than we are. They can't get away. We can." "Come on," he motioned to Fourth Brother. Let's go check the ropes. They trudged forward along the line of camels and stayed as far from the royal carts as possible. Chengli made a game of trying to count the colorful flags that marked the separate merchants who had joined their group, for the caravan had grown as they traveled. Master Fong alone had 100 loaded camels, with each set of 10 in the care of separate camel drivers. Chengli's set was the last string of 10, and he had them all tied together, head to tail, by ropes looped through their wooden nose pegs, with El Khalid in front. Fourth brother, with his 10 donkeys, followed behind, plus they had extra donkeys and horses to ride, sell for provisions along the way, or use as spares in case of injury. Other travelers had joined them, so that the caravan now included not only merchants with their loaded animals, but also soldiers with their bows and arrows, Buddhist monks in their rough brown robes, and entire families looking for a new life in the hotter, drier lands to the north. All of them trudged along, wet and grumbling in the rain. As the day wore on, however, the rain slackened and finally stopped. Master chose a resting spot on well-drained land, and the call came down the line to settle for the night. Each group drew together, cook set up tents, and all across the soggy field, campfires sent up a friendly glow. Chengli turned his attention to the animals. He liked keeping them healthy and making them comfortable, but he'd had a hard time learning to deal with the camels. The warmth of early spring made their thick, woolly fur begin to loosen and fall out, but when Chengli first tried to brush it, the camel turned and aimed a mouthful of stinking spit at him. Within the first week, however, he'd learned how to keep the animals calm. Now, one by one, he hobbled the camels so they could not run away during the night, and then he released their packs and examined each one for scratches or sores on its body and thickly padded toes. Next, he checked each sack, harness, and rope. If damaged, he repaired it. Only then, when all his animals had been cared for, could he join the circle in front of the food tent. He looked around at the men who now shared his life. Tough men, they'd been hardened by endless walking along endless trails. They all wore the same tan hemp tunics and trousers and boots made of pounded wool with the toes and heels reinforced with leather. Chengli's favorite among the workers was the one everyone called Uncle Tao, a grandfatherly man with unruly hair tied in an equally unruly topknot. The hair on his head was black, but his beard was pure white, a curious sight, thought Chengli. Uncle Tao worked as second in command with Master Fong. Together, these two kept their eyes on the entire caravan, checking both men and animals. Uncle Tao often made his way to the end of the line to see that Chengli was learning the finer points of caring for the camels, quietly teaching the boy whatever he needed to understand. From him, Chengli learned that their first true rest stop would be at the bustling city of Lanzhou, some 500 miles northwest of Chang'an. At the slow pace of the heavily loaded camels, 12 or 15 miles a day, that 500 miles would take them about 8 weeks of walking. On most nights, when the men gathered for supper, Master Fong and Uncle Tao, as the two highest-ranking men in the group, sat together off to the side, nearly hidden in the shadows, watching, listening, and missing nothing. Chengli sat between the two camel drivers, Bori the wolf and Abdul, who both came from far mountains. Abdul was the quiet one, rarely talking, but always listening and ready to help. Bori, on the other hand, talked all the time, to people, to the animals, to himself. It was from Bori that Chengli heard about the 3 huge water wheels. "You'll recognize Lanzhou long before we get there," Bori told him, "because you can see the wooden water wheels, as high as 10 stacked camels. They're famous. The buckets lift water out of the yellow river and dump it into irrigation ditches high up on the cliff. They are so old that nobody knows who built them, but everybody calls them Mr. Zwo's water wheels." Chengli thought he must be joking, but it did give him something to watch for. This night, however, no one talked about the caravan. Everyone talked about Princess Mei Ling. "Always," Bori said, "that woman is giving orders." "Orders?" Abdul countered. "She is ranting about everything. The road, the cart, the boredom. Why doesn't she get out and walk like the rest of us?" "What? An imperial princess walking beside camel drivers?" Bori burst into laughter at the ridiculous thought. "I caught a glimpse of her," Uncle Tao said, "and she is much too old to be sent as a bride. Her hair is gray already. Whatever is our emperor thinking?" "You're crazy," Abdul shot back. "You must have seen her servant, the Amma. I heard the princess is tall and beautiful." "Well, just keep her away from me," Bori said as he rolled into his blanket and prepared to sleep. The other men stood, sought out patches of higher ground away from the puddles, wrapped themselves in blankets, and one by one fell asleep. From the depths of his blanket, Chengli heard Master Fong's voice grumble into the silence. "Where's my jacket? It should be right here in my blanket. This dampness sinks into my old bones. I need my woolen jacket." Chengli opened his eyes and wriggled out of his blanket. Next to him, Fourth Brother reached over and shoved him down. "Here, master," called Fourth Brother. "I'm still awake. I'll help you look. Maybe you hung it on one of the ropes. I'll go look." "I'll help too," Chengli said, sitting up again. "Don't bother. I can do it." Fourth Brother again pushed him down onto his blanket. He lit a torch from the campfire and moved out among the sleeping men and piles of baggage. Master Fong shook out of his blanket. "That jacket cannot be lost. I wear it every night. The design of scorpions and spiders protects me from the stings and bites of that dreadful desert." Chengli closed his eyes and against the blackness saw images of huge spiders and snapping scorpions tumbling over each other. He hoped Master Fong's jacket had enough magic to protect the entire caravan. He prayed Fourth Brother would come back with it. Fourth Brother's voice signaled his return. "Sorry, master. I poked high and low. I walked on both sides of the line. I found nothing." Master sank down on his blanket and groaned his displeasure into the blackness of the night. Morning dawned with a clear blue sky, and the sun shone on a vast plain of yellow mud. Uncle Tao called out, "Today we enter the walled city of Lanzhou, spread along the banks of the great Yellow River." "But first," Bori the wolf called back, "comes this slippery hillside and the narrow Leitan River. Be careful!" They moved forward along the wide and well-traveled road. With slow, exacting movements, the merchants, beasts, families, and monks picked their way carefully down the slope that tipped the road toward the river, each silently concentrated on his own safety. Suddenly a crash slammed against the hillside. People screamed. Camels reared. Chengli jerked around. Heading straight for him came a blur of red and gold. The princess's cart careened wildly as it barreled through the mud, shoving in front of it a thrashing, braying donkey caught in the jumbled harness. One wheel cracked and spun out of sight along a rut in the mountainside, causing the cart to tip dangerously as it picked up speed. Soldiers wheeled their horses around and jumped to the ground to try to stop the cart's downhill skid and free the donkey. Servants tumbled out of the cart, hitting the mud with a sickening splash. Chengli yelled. Toward him, a small girl child came catapulting down the rain-filled road, sliding straight into the path of the splintered wheel shaft. Chengli flung himself toward the hurtling child, arms outstretched, grasping for anything to stop her slide. "The servant girl!" he screamed. "Stop her!" He slammed into the girl, shoving her away from the broken cart. As he lay sputtering, his body half on top of hers in his attempt to save her, he caught sight of thick black braids encircling her head and sparkling golden jewels threaded among the blades. "Ah! It's a princess!" he bellowed in surprise, dropping her back into the mud. "Get away from me!" shrieked the princess as she frantically wiped at her muddy face with her mud-soaked hands. She slapped at Chengli and scrambled to her knees in the mud. "Help me!" she screamed to her soldiers. "Forget the stupid cart! Come here and get me!" The princess pushed herself to her feet and stood sobbing, shooing Chengli away and shouting, "How dare you, camel boy! How dare you touch a princess!" She stamped her foot, sending a new layer of mud splashing over her long silk dress. "Soldiers! Arrest him! Chop off his head!" The two soldiers who were working to the right, the fallen cart, stopped and slithered through the mud to grab Chengli. He felt his eyes open wide, and his heart began to race. "What was I supposed to do?" he yelled back at the muddy girl child. "Let you get crushed by the wagon wheel?" For an answer, a soldier whacked him on the side of the head. "Silence, camel boy! Show respect!" The princess's Amma, with eyes as round as her chubby face, came slip-sliding toward him, balancing herself against the side of the fallen cart. Behind her came a young servant boy. "Come, Princess Mei-ling," Amma said quietly, reaching for the princess with trembling hands. "We will go wash in the river." She turned to the boy coming up beside her. "Dakshesh, go help repair the cart and tell your sister to come help me with the princess." Turning back toward the princess, who stood crying and shivering in globs of brown mud, Amma shook her head and looked as if she couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. "Well, child," she said, "you are a sight. But hush now, control yourself. That camel boy saved your life." Amma glanced at the soldiers, who still held on to Chengli and gave them a knowing smile. Then, holding the princess's arm, she called to the servant girl, "Sudarshana, take her other arm. We will go down to the river." Once the princess disappeared from sight, Chengli pulled himself away from the soldier's loosened grip and ran sliding down the hill to where the rest of the men worked at calming the terrified animals. He threw himself into the midst of the group of workers. "Did you see that?" he gasped. "Did you see that? The princess, she's a child. She's littler than me.